The world looks to California to answer the hard questions, for redemption, to introduce the unfamiliar, to be resilient. Because California bounces back, holds us accountable, values who we are, remains vigilant, defies those in our way, and stands for community. Here on the West Coast, we're at the center of it all. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
welcome to this evening's Ideas Exchange.
When these conditions arise, we arise too.
And I think that sometimes limitation is good for artistry and good for creativity.
You're at a situation where you're like, well, is it worth it?
You cannot be an effective leader if you shortchange yourself.
I love asking why. That is my favorite question to ask, is just the why.
Take that passion and do something great with it. Save the world.
I don't have any more secrets. And that is a wonderful way to go through life.
Thank you all for watching this story, video, post, whatever this is. Thank you so much. Bye.
Good evening. I'm Greg Braxton, television writer with the Los Angeles Times calendar section. Welcome all to this Ideas Exchange, the LA Times series, where we engage with creative thinkers who help us expand our knowledge in lively conversations. They also challenge our assumptions and leave us better informed for the ideas and issues that are defining our times. Tonight, we welcome our special guest, award-winning author and WNYC cultural critic, Rebecca Carroll. And special guest, actress, producer, best-selling author, and entrepreneur, Gabrielle Union. They're here to discuss Rebecca Carroll's new memoir, Surviving the White Gaze, which chronicles her revealing search for racial identity and her own power, both as a creative artist and as a woman. With vivid and uncompromising candor, Carroll traces her journey, starting as a young Black child adopted by artistic white parents, her emotional and difficult relationship with her birth mother, and what it was like to grow up in a rural New Hampshire town where she was the only Black person. Before we welcome Rebecca and Gabrielle, I want to remind viewers that copies of Surviving the White Gaze are available for purchase with a signed bookplate from Skylight Books. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Rebecca Carroll and Gabrielle Union. Hello all, how you doing?
Hello.
Hi, great. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you so much for doing this. I want to dive right in. But before we get to the book specifically, I wanted to ask Rebecca first. This book is arriving at a time when race is such a fiery and divisive issue in our country. It's in the center of everything that's going on. What do you feel that Surviving the White Gaze is going to add to this dialogue? What do you hope it will add to the dialogue that's going on?
Well, first I would say that race, the purpose of race and racism is for it to be divisive. So it's always divisive. And what I think where we are in this moment after 4 years of a white supremacist president is that we have a moment where we can reset. But I want to make sure that people are aware that race and racism is a conversation that is fiery or having a moment should be resisted, that we have to sort of come into it in another way, which is that the idea of divisiveness has been the sole purpose of race and systemic racism. What I hope Surviving the White Gaze will bring, I hope that it will offer an an expert experience and insight into sort of the model of the relationship between white people and Black people. White people have set up the model for how to view and value Black folks. And so in the context of white adoptive parents, that hits very close, that cuts very close to the bone. And so I think that my book and also the stories of other, Black adoptees in interracial, transracial adoption situations have a really valuable contribution to make in this moment that, for better or worse, is a reset in terms of these conversations.
Great. And Gabrielle, you've been in the business for so long and you've seen so many changes. How do you see what's going on in the country impacting your industry, impacting Hollywood, and impacting the view of Black people in Hollywood?
How does it impact Black Hollywood? I mean, it's we're kind of like, oh, welcome to the party. We've been here. The water's warm. Grab a drink. We've been talking about this since Hollywood kicked off. For white folks in Hollywood, I think this has been, for some, very eye-opening. And for some, there is this knee-jerk reaction to decentering themselves in every narrative. And so the reaction has been kind of hostile. And yet for others, there's that, that phrase that my college professor, Professor Hill from UCLA said, race is an issue for people who have to deal with it every day. If you don't have to deal with it every day, it's by and large a non-issue. And I think for some of those people, they like to say the words diversity and inclusion, they like to throw them around, sprinkle them in casual conversation and in business meetings, because just saying them, they feel like they're actually doing it, but also refusing to decenter themselves and really do the work that creates real change. A lot of it is very performative. The reactions to George Floyd, the reaction to your little black square on Juneteenth, or a lot of the conversations, a lot of the shock and awe, it's all very performative. They want to be seen as good. I'm not like those people. But at the end of the day, the proof is kind of in the pudding. And if you don't have a history of inclusion or diversity in your work or creating those kind of opportunities, it kind of is what it is. And just throwing around the words diversity and inclusion does not absolve you of your actual real harm that you have caused. So it's a kind of an awakening, I will say.
I just want to grab onto what you just said, Gab, because it's so important in terms of, one, recognizing that diversity and inclusion is actually still systemically using the tools of white supremacy, but also in the context of interracial adoption, it's like you sort of tick off the boxes. And I think, one of the things that I try to do in Surviving the White Gaze is like, my parents thought, okay, she's going to have a Black dance teacher. That is great for them. But for me, I needed someone to contextualize what it meant to have a Black dance teacher and not for it to go away after my dance class was over. And I think that this is the thing that we're really struggling with in this moment of racial reckoning in all industries, certainly in your industry, in my industry, in the confluence of our industries together, is that, all that is seen is the decentering, when in fact, it's a different kind of empowerment for white folks who want to be good, and we're giving it to them, saying, if you are able to decenter yourselves, we can create a new kind of power together. And it just blows my mind, blows my mind, doesn't blow my mind, but just the how unaccustomed so many white people who have gone to these great schools, who've done all the right things, who don't have the language or the interest in having it be beyond more than the black square on Juneteenth.
It really feels like it's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Gabrielle.
it really does feel like we gave you your Black ballet teacher. You know, we gave you Malcolm and Marie. My God, what else do you want? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, we gave you the one thing. Isn't that it? Like, that's it. What else do you want? Yeah, oof.
But that is the dynamic, though. It is very much like, if I change the way that I look at you or assign value to you, I need, first of all, for you to appreciate that before we go any further. You know?
How frustrating is that for both of you? The fact that it's this way, the fact that you're being presented. It is a moment, but still, it's like people still aren't getting it the way you wish they would.
Well, here's a beautiful thing about getting older. You know, my fucks have gone the way of the wind. You know, and that's really freeing. And also, you know, having written this book at this time, where I really, really waited until I was absolutely good and ready and had the emotional fortitude and the foundation of squad and family and my son. And so I'm less interested in being frustrated and more interested in how I deal with that frustration, you know, and what are the moments that I give myself grace, and what are the moments where I ramp it up a little bit, all while thinking I'm doing this for my kid. You know, I'm trying to create a space and a runway for my kid.
It's interesting because when Rebecca sent me the book, it was it June? Was it in June?
I think it was before that.
Was it before June?
Past summer? Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it was this past summer.
Yeah.
And it was at a time where I was, you know, personally sort of spiraling in quarantine. We're seeing this, you know, wide scale sort of racial reckoning, and in a different kind of conversation surrounding, you know, race. And when I got Rebecca's book, the title gave me such pause, and it knocked the wind out of me. And as I went through chapter, something that stuck with me was, I have been so centering white validation, the white gaze, whiteness. Who could I be if I didn't?
Right.
What am I capable of if my joy, my home, my work, my family didn't all kind of swirl around what do white people think?
That part.
Like, what jobs would I have taken? What would I have passed on? Where would I live? Like, how would I have raised our children? It all, when I really got down to the get down, as I'm going through the book, I'm like, oh my God, hadn't thought of that. Oh my God. Because we're not taught to question it. It just is. Whiteness is the default. And that never-ending Hobbit-like, you know, Lord of the Rings like quest for the precious. The precious is whiteness and white, you know, validation, and to have someone's white gaze upon you. What if I just did something that Black folks liked, and that was the actual award?
It's like two things. One is like that scene from Do the Right Thing, you know, where Bugging Out's like, oh, with his friends, right? You know, like when they're actually confronting and looking at whiteness in their neighborhood, they're like, what is going on? But also, I think it's really important for people to realize, particularly Black folks, that the internalization is actually, it's almost more powerful than DNA, right? We have internalized so much about standards of beauty, standards of value, standards of art, all of it, that we go through this process. And this was very much what it was for me in writing this book, of, you know, excavating that which we have internalized so that we can put something else right, Gab, what you were saying about like if you weren't just swirling around or thinking about the white gaze, it's like you get to put all this beauty inside of Black art and Black love and Black creativity, but it takes a lot of work to get the other stuff out.
I mean, twice a week therapy throughout this whole pandemic to really grapple with it. You know, there were so many moments that the book just made me really wonder who I am, who I could have been, and who I want to be moving forward. And I just hadn't thought about it. It just was. You just move through the world and you do things based on this idea of what success means. And rarely is that the idea of success or beauty or even capitalism rooted in or centering anything that Black folks or any person of color deems as good. Mm-hmm. And if you are running from that, what are you running to? And what's going to happen when you run into the arms of white supremacy? I know what we think is going to happen, but I haven't seen anyone where it's really worked out for you in a way that your soul is not eroded.
Exactly.
I was wondering, Rebecca, was there a particular event in your life or an instance which really inspired you to dive into this? Because it's really a harrowing journey, and I wanted to know if there was something specific that said, okay, this is the time that I have to do this.
Yes,
to
absolutely.
Get out this story.
Yeah, for sure. It was Ferguson. It was when Michael Brown was shot, and my then 9-year-old said, "Are we going to get shot, Mom?" And because we're Black, it's not that we hadn't talked about our Blackness before that, but the way in which he was so, I mean, a 9-year-old boy saying to me, my heart, you know, living outside of my body, said to me with real curiosity, "Are we going to get shot because we're Black?" And it just felt like a tectonic shift. And I was so angry and so enraged by the casual racism that I had lived with throughout my own childhood, where good, well-meaning white liberals were sort of like, "Oh, it's terrible. Oh, it's this," but never took to heart the absolute bone-deep violence of racism, anti-Black racism in this country. And that was the shift. That for me was the shift. I was at the time, I was a columnist at The Guardian, and I just started like popping out these op-eds and pieces where it was just like firing out rage. And I had a really great editor there at the time, Megan Carpentier, and she really just encouraged me to go with it, and I did. So that was practice. That was practice for being ready to write the memoir.
And Gabrielle, was there a particular story in the memoir or a particular incident that you just said, "Oh my God, that's me," or "I know what that feels like"?
Oh, I mean, all of it. But the part that just broke my heart was the sophomore prom chapter, where young Rebecca convinces her friend, was his name Nate? I think his name was Nate, to go to sophomore prom, just as friends, which, you know, when you're a Black girl in predominantly white settings, you always have to say it just like that. Just as friends. So like they don't think that you would actually dare to think that they would want a Black person. And his dad, who's the freaking history teacher who had been tormenting her with, you know, just out and out racism in the classroom, forbid Nate to go with her, because why would you want to basically document look back and you documented yourself having gone to prom with a Black girl. And then later, her really sort of ruminating on the way her white friends think of her and regard her. That took me right back. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all the hair, all that, you know, all the chapters where she talks about her hair and living in a place where there are, you know, very few Black people, much less Black hairstylists. That was a whole, oof. When you said I couldn't tuck my hair behind my ear, like my friends felt that.
You knew that. You knew that.
All too real. Yeah, it just, it just all hurts. And the being so enamored, almost to the point of being obsessed with the golden kids, those golden white kids that occupy this rarefied air, and just wanting that, even if it's just to share air with them. You know, when you talked about, it goes beyond just valuing certain white friends, but what it represented. It was a bigger representation of acceptance by white folks and what that means to be accepted in a more intimate, not romantic, but an intimate way. And to have a white person value your friendship, what that means, that, woo, that, I don't want to say it hurt, but because it does hurt. It has been hurting. I didn't realize it was like a long-standing, open, festering wound, and that's rooted in a distrust that I never quite knew where I stood. You know, with people that, you know, claim to be your best friends and that loved you.
I think what's so interesting and devastating about that is, you know, we talk a lot about celebrity. We talk a lot about how our celebrities in America are like, you know, equivalent to British royalty. But for Black kids growing up in all white environments, white people are royalty, period, full stop. And so any kind of adjacency or acceptance or appreciation is like, woo, look what is happening for me. And what I really hope, Greg, just going back to your original question, is that young Black girls specifically, but also young Black folks in general, will see that the power actually is within yourself. You don't have to give that power to white folks. You don't have to make them royalty. You can create your own royalty. And I don't mean it in the sort of, you know, Queen, King, Beyonce sense, which is another story in another way to talk about it. But I mean in terms of literal confidence in what you give and what you impart and the gifts that you have and the joy that you can make that has absolutely nothing to do with the white gaze. That was one of the things about Toni Morrison that just sent me, was that pages and pages and pages of these brilliantly written books had no white people. Like, wow. Amazing.
Wait, I want to ask you, do you mind?
Yes, no. Ask.
There was just in looking back, where you said, wherein I both sought out and pushed away my reflection, listened to the wrong people and harbored an overwhelming sense of convoluted grief, a grief that guided me here to myself.
Mm-hmm.
When thinking about creating that, your own sort of Black space to be whatever it is that you want to be, can you talk a little bit more about that, where you're trying to move away from and also towards it at the same time?
Oof. I would respond to that with an anecdote that I've shared before. But that is, you know, as you know, my husband is white, and we're raising our son as Black and biracial, which he is. And probably 4 or 5 years ago, you know, we were looking at middle schools, and And I was just, on my thing. Like, we have to go to a school where he's got numerous Black teachers and Black peers and blah, blah, blah. And my son was like, Mom, you are so extra about this. I was like, well, it's really important. Name 3 Black role models. And he said, Corinne, Dorlin, and you. And it never occurred to me that I was enough, that I was enough of a Black role model for him. And so that was like both pushing away, but also realizing, embracing that even as I had been raised and tried to survive and become a Black woman, my child had said to me, you're giving me what I need. And I never had that. And I never knew how to find it. And so even in the moments where the ancestors dropped folks down, my Black dance teacher and my Black professor and, Corinne. And even then I thought, is this really going to make me valuable? Is this really going to be enough? And it's my son who has clarified and verified that for me.
That's dope.
This book takes us into some pretty dark areas and dark paths. And I just wondered, whenever I write something personal about myself and sort of get into that head, it really has an impact on me, and what it was like for you viscerally to really just go back into that era and back into your mind as a young girl and those experiences and write about them so vividly. I mean, was it a really visceral, painful experience for you? Was it easy? Could you just go through it, or what was it like for you?
So here's the thing. Those memories were doing more damage in my body than they are now outside of my body. And so it was really, really important for me. Memoirists talk about excavating and catharsis and all those things, which are absolutely true. But for me specifically, it felt like I had been living with those memories in a way that was so unproductive and so it was still affecting how I identified as a woman, as a Black woman, as a mother, as a partner. And I just, that was another marker where I knew it was time to write, because it was time to put these memories somewhere else, let them live somewhere else. And so in that way, it wasn't actually painful. It was very freeing and it was very gratifying. I mean, after I wrote the shitty first draft, which was painful. But once I got the sort of sense and flow of how it was going to come onto the page, then it was actually quite freeing.
When you have your parents, your mom and dad, who obviously love you, your white parents obviously loved you, but they weren't equipped at all to deal with what you were experiencing as a young Black child. So when we're talking about adoption, do you feel that white parents who are going to go in that direction and do what your parents did need to really be more sensitive and aware and really dive into it, really come equipped to deal with that dynamic? Do they need to do their homework?
The easy short answer is obviously yes. The trickier answer is that until white people show me personally that they understand the way in which they set the precedent for the way in which white people deal with Black people and assign them value and assign them no value and decide what and who we are, I don't trust interracial adoption. That's just me personally. I'm not trying to tell people what to do or how to live or how to parent. But until we can get past that part of it, where white people recognize that they have set the tone and the tenor of the relationship between Black and white folks in this country, I feel very skeptical about interracial adoption, particularly white parents adopting Black children. Having said that, yeah, I mean, you have to be conversant, you have to be immersed, you have to be, and I read about it in the book. You know, my husband is white. He is, you know, he is a scholar, but he's also a musician, and he is, you know, a baller, and he is somebody who is immersed in Blackness, not in an exploitative, appropriative way, in a way that is like, yeah, I get it. I don't need to tell you I get it. And that's the thing, is like, if you get it, you don't have to tell me you get it. You know, how many white friends I've had in the last 5 years who have emailed me to say, oh, I read that anti-racist book. Oh, I read White Fragility. I'm so sorry. Like, if it's working, you don't have to tell me, right? You don't have to tell me. So as it applies to interracial adoption, I think, yeah, if you're not fully conversant in Blackness and ready to raise a Black child as though your family were and is in large part Black, then yeah, you're not ready.
Gabrielle, your parents, you are not adopted, but yet you have to deal with some difficulties growing up too with your parents and racial identity.
Absolutely. And I think it's the root is sort of similar. It's in the quest for to be to live the American dream. You want to move into a certain kind of neighborhood. You want your kids to go to certain kind of schools. You want them to speak the Queen's English. You want them, you know, their hair to look a certain way. You want them to be always presentable, whatever that means. And at the end of the day, you're always centering white ideals. And when you put yourself in cities and in communities that don't affirm Blackness, it's the same thing. You're really not centering what's best ultimately for your kids. You're centering your idea of what is going to help you succeed in the eyes of white folks. And those are two different things. And we always looked at them as kind of the same. I've done it myself. And as much as I was like, I would never do that. When I have kids, I'm not, and cut to, especially when we're in Florida, like living with,
right?
The
like
stand your
that's
ground
the internalization, right?
It's deep.
Like that's what I'm talking. The internalization that we seldom focus on. We talk a lot about how systemic racism is, it's this, it's that, it's the DNA of the country. But what we don't do is talk about the way in which individuals have internalized it. And in order for us to push on and move on, laws and legislation is nice, but we have to uninternalize.
Yeah. And we don't, and we just sort of adopt it and carry it on to the next generation. And then we pump our kids with the same, foundation of white supremacy. And it's jarring when you're like, wait, I want off this ride. I don't even know what my world looks like without this ride of white supremacy. And my parents were on it. And I was on it. I had put my kids on it. And now we're all being flung off the carousel. Like, where's the Blackness? Fling me off into the, into the sea of Blackness. I'll sink or swim, but on my own, And it's eye-opening. But if you aren't constantly challenging every thought that pops into your head of like, is this really what's best for me, my soul, my children, for their identity, for their confidence, for their self-esteem? Or am I such a slave to bullshit this bullshit that has been perpetuated and kept us complacent as a people, you know, for forever. Yeah, and you think, you know, I'm not gonna be my parents, and then you find yourself centering the same crap. Oh, this is a good school. Well, is it a good school if it's devoid of minorities?
Yeah.
If it's devoid of you know, teachers of color? Like I kind of gave up on black. I'm like, I'll take any. Like, how many Asians? Like, how many Latinx? Like, what do you got? When people can count, like, you know, when you walk into a school, like into the PTA, and you can literally, you start counting that, like, you know, like, I don't want to be able to count every person of color, and be like, well, Gab, you did okay on that time. It's like, no, you know, we got caught up into what good is. What is a good school? What is a good neighborhood? And what am I preparing my kids for? But to continue to be a slave of the same crap.
And to that end, and I don't know if it's Henry David Thoreau, if it's Pablo Picasso, or some other white guy who said the unexamined life is not worth living. I don't know if you know who said that. But the unexamined life in that context is totally about the white examined life. Like the irony, or perhaps not irony, but I think about it, or maybe it was Freud who said that. I don't remember who said that, but I know it was a white guy. And just thinking about how we need to change what it means to examine our lives. Gab, you were just saying, you know, like you need to be in sort of constant conversation with yourself, engage with yourself, but also with your family and your children and your culture and your art and how you want to push it forward and what you surround yourselves with. You know, I think a lot about, and I write about this in the book, you know, my son, when he was younger, again, you know, and we were leaving a visit with my white parents, and he said, Mom, does it hurt your feelings that there's like no evidence that they raised a black child? Like no black art, no black music, no nothing anywhere. And I was like, yeah, kinda does. Yeah. So yeah, but I also think being in conversation is not a chore. It is about creating, and as creatives, Gab, you can maybe agree with me on this, is that in the context of being creatives, having a constant dialogue about the ways in which we are gorgeous and amazing, and not treated fairly, and you know that we have to grieve so many violent deaths on a regular basis. You know, that makes us so much more equipped to push the needle, to create new language, to make things that endure.
Absolutely.
So there's this very popular series on NBC called This Is Us.
I've never heard of it, Greg. Just kidding.
Which examines the dynamics of a mixed race family. And one of my frustrations with the show is that this dynamic is so complex and could be the center of a whole series, but yet there's so many storylines and everything going on. And wanted to get your thoughts on, you know, what is probably pop culture's only real examination of what's going on in a mixed race family, and what that show maybe needs to do in order to get it better or to correct what's going on.
We've come a long way from the Drummond Family. What is that show from the 80s? What was it? Different Strokes. We've come a long way from Different Strokes, which was a terrible, terrible show. I have been in conversation with This Is Us from the beginning. I talked to Randall like a crazy person. I think what I want to say about This Is Us and also my story and also the forthcoming Colin Kaepernick story via Ava DuVernay is that adoption stories are bigger than adoption, particularly interracial, transracial Black kids and white families. And so what I hope that audiences will appreciate and be able to engage with is that, it's not just about this idea of making whatever kind of family you want to make. It's about Black kids being in white nucleus, in a white nucleus for the formative years of their lives. And what kind of expertise that gives us when it comes to dealing with and talking about race and racism in America. And so I would say, I kind of wish that Sterling Brown did more conversations, or, obviously we're in a pandemic, but, talk more sort of about his expertise or his research in playing that part. I have certainly tweeted and questioned and interviewed folks about, are there any Black adoptees in the writers' room? There should be, there needs to be, but behind that is that what we bring is an expertise that basically models the history of America and the way in which white people decide that Black people will be better off under their guidance.
You say you've been. What has been the response to your concerns from that show?
Oh, I hosted a podcast called Come Through at WMIC and talked with Kay Oyegan, who's one of the writers from that show. And, we talked, it had a robust conversation about that. And the creator of the show had a friend who had adopted. I think there's still this kind of defensive-ness about, well, we're not bad people for wanting to adopt Black children. And that's sort of the default response on all kind of measures of racially challenging conversations for white people who have made specific choices to include Black people in their lives, the way in which they decide to have Black people in their lives. So, I'm just going to keep it pushing, really.
Gabrielle, you're familiar with that series too. What is your perspective on that?
I can only speak on the first season. I kind of got lost in the sauce after that. I was honestly surprised because I have very low expectations. I'm in Hollywood. I know what these rooms, the writers' rooms look like. I'm in the fight every day trying to get people, to get creatives to be able to be centered in their own narratives. And I try to be as forceful as possible in the fight to get better representation in those rooms and creating more senior writers and all of that. So that being said, I just had very low expectations, even though I've known Sterling for a long time. I just assumed it would be the parents would only be seen in this bubble of benevolence. And isn't young Randall just so lucky? And I was surprised that they, had deeper conversations than I had assumed that they would. And I don't know what happened after season 1, but it just felt that whether it was Kay or Sterling or whoever else is, in the room that has some power, clearly probably pushed the conversation and some of that dialogue in a direction that, I don't know, it was probably hard fought and hard won, just in knowing how these rooms work. And I hope you hear the chuckle in my voice because it is a challenge. So yeah, I was surprised that they even had the conversations that they did.
It's a
when
very
they introduced
good show.
Yeah,
it's a
when
very
they introduced
good
the
show.
character at the Black woman at the pool in the first season, that was like kind of called Mandy Moore's character to task about Randall, and I was like, oh, okay. That there was even a challenge to what a good woman, you know, Mandy's character is for taking in this Black child, and she could only be good. Like a white person who adopts a Black child can only be good, and you should never examine anything beyond their goodness. And I was surprised that they did.
It's a very, very good show. My point, in part, is that it shouldn't be the only show, and it shouldn't be only about the fact that it is an interracial adoption, but that Randall, in this context and in his experience, you know, brings some kind of expertise. I mean, this is not a spoiler. Well, it kind of is a spoiler, but you know, later, Gab, he adopts a child, a Black child, and it was kind of interesting and also kind of gutting for me, because you know, I always thought I was going to have at least 2 kids, but after my son was born, I was completely blown away and had to deal with the way in which I felt attached to him, and that I could only give him this amount of love. In any event, he really, really, really wanted a sibling, and so when he was about 5 or 6 or 7, he was like, "Mom, you should adopt. Like, of all people, like, you'd be the one to adopt. You've got, you know, this experience, and you can work through your own pain." And I said, "Sweetie, that's not how it works. You don't work through your own pain through your children." But I do think that the show, having taken that on, was a really smart and courageous move. I just want to see it get bigger. I want the conversation to broaden. That's all.
We have some audience questions if you guys are ready for them, and to add to this great conversation. So hopefully I will. Someone is asking, Rebecca, when you're not writing, what is your favorite thing to do?
I really enjoy reveling in my resilience. I mean, obviously, I love, you know, being with my son and my husband and the family that we've made. I used to make collage art sort of devoutly, and that was a real release for me. But I'm just learning to enjoy that I am here where I am, and that I have my health and my family and my work, and I try to actively receive that, and that is a good pastime for me.
Great. Let's see. We have another question. Hold on. In terms of, let's see, this is from, let's see.
Gab, I was wishing I had that like cool ass lemon banana yellow tracksuit that you had. Do you remember that? That you had on Instagram? Like, that's what I wanted to wear tonight. Sorry, Greg.
I love that too.
Let's see. Here's one for Gabrielle. Gabrielle, what has been your most frustrating experience in Hollywood in terms of dealing with race?
To pick just one. You know what? It's, again, because I have such low expectations, it's when I lull myself into feeling like real change is happening, and that people get it, and that we can figure out a way forward together to create, you know, as Rebecca talked about, this something new that includes all of us. And you think you're talking to an ally, and it's just,
you're not.
More people who are committed to not getting out of the way or creating a little tiny, smidgen of space for anyone else that doesn't look like them, constantly running into people who truly believe like they're part of the solution, but don't understand how decentering yourself and your own needs and your own narratives from any and all is required. It's frustrating because you can't have real change unless people really get that, maybe I actually wasn't the best for this job and there is someone better. And it doesn't say anything about my character or about my ability to create a little bit more space for someone else who is better equipped to tell this story or to be more generous with opportunities. Now I think I'm at an age where, and I've been in the industry for so long, it's less about what I'm missing out on or I feel like, oh, so-and-so standing in my way. I'm trying to create so many opportunities for so many more people. And if you're not gonna help, cool, get out of the fucking way. And there's a lot of people in the way that don't realize that they're in the way, that are causing a lot of harm. And it's heartbreaking. It's really, really heartbreaking. I had a conversation with a creative that I've been a fan of. And literally she starts off the conversation talking to me of all people about how the studios are now trying to force, diverse characters, which what the hell is that? What is a diverse character? Whatever the hell, that they're trying to force diverse characters in development. And I mean, I don't want to be, a slave to quotas. And I was like, and that's just the other day. Like, and this is daily. And that's one of the good guys. So, and then, capped off the meeting with where I made a quip. I was like, well, I love to fight. And I'd had a hoodie kind of halfway on because I tried out a hairstyle that didn't exactly go the way I planned. I did look a little bit like Frederick Douglass. So I had this hoodie kind of like covering part of my head. And she's like, yeah, I mean, I can tell you've got that hoodie on. All right, look at the time. This Zoom is about to. And it's those ones that feel like jolts because you're not prepared for it.
But Gab, I mean, just to build on that a little bit, it's like, again, I harbor on this, but I think it's really important, which is that this internalized way of thinking and feeling, is favorable to white people, and what they're not recognizing is that to excavate or uninternalize those things will give them a different kind of power. We're not saying y'all need to just lie down and back up, although time to time I think about that. But saying like we're trying to make something new that is actually a money maker, right? Certainly in your industry, in publishing, in media, it's like we're just saying uninternalize what you've been doing and the way that you've been seeing. Take a minute. Right? Like you think about all of these, like, what are they called? When companies go, retreats or whatnot, and how you take a step forward if you grew up with a $5 allowance, or take a step back, or whatever it is. But there are so many better ways that we could spend that kind of time thinking about just having conversations, just thinking about backing up and away from the privilege of whiteness and not being defensive and not being not feeling like there still has to be a control factor.
Yep.
Great. Let's see. We have some more questions. Hold on. This is from Maxine. If the grown-up Rebecca could go back to the teenage Rebecca and try to help her, what do you think would be the most valuable piece of advice that she could give?
The problem with that question or that idea is that teenagers don't take advice, actually. And I certainly was so deeply invested in trying to forge this really weird and convoluted path about my identity. I don't think anybody, certainly not even adult Rebecca, could have made sense of it for me. But what I have said to young Black women and girls who I mentor is that, your agency is exactly and precisely the way you want it to be, which is to say that you take into account the way that people look at you, talk about you, assign value to you, and then you say, you know what? Actually, that doesn't matter. What I want to do is go headlong into my creative endeavors, my intellect, my emotional value, and my mental health.
That's great. Great. See, I think we have a couple of more questions. Let's see. Randy wants to know from Gabrielle, what's your favorite film that you have done?
Oh, that I've done. I was like, Grease. No, not that I have done. God, there's my favorite performance is Cadillac Records. It was one of the few times I've been completely challenged on a soul level, and I felt like I rose to the occasion. My favorite movie experience, Bad Boys 2, to be, on South Beach, with Will and Martin running around, being treated like a princess for 6 months, getting to just while out while making a big, tentpole movie. Yeah, that was pretty awesome. I mean, it was such a Black movie. It's never been referred to in that way. But when you have the first, 3 people on the call sheet Black, that usually spells Black movie. But so that would be one of my favorite. It was a great, very fun experience.
Speaking of movies, I heard it through the grapevine, Rebecca, that Surviving the White Gaze, we may be seeing that turned into a film soon.
I think it's not going to be film. I think we're going to try first to do it as a limited TV series, which makes sense to me. I, like so many others, and particularly Black women, were so blown away by Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You, which got snubbed with the Golden Globe noms. But the like a singular piece of gorgeous television. And so that's my bar. It's a very high bar, but I would love to, because I think that the story, the book as I've written it, it has sort of parts and narratives, and that lends itself to episodes. I could also see it as a film, but I think I would prefer to try to go at it first as a limited series TV.
I mean, Greg, she's being very modest. There was a whole bidding war. Everyone and their mother wanted it, including me and my pod at Sony. And, everyone who's read the book is blown away. and you want in, whether that's into the conversation, you know, into a world where these stories are being centered and amplified. You want in. But I can't say it enough. This book came at a time in my life where it shifted me. And I do firmly believe this book will shift the culture.
Gab?
Well, that's true.
Thank you.
Can't wait
Well, you
to
saw
see
me,
it.
like, when we were talking afterwards, I was like, you know, because it's one thing to write the book and it's another thing to go on the press tour and then deal with everybody's feelings. I was like, you go there. Like, I'm having an anxiety attack from the comfort of my, you know, my bed as I'm talking to you. Like, what are you gonna do? This.
I know, and
this is powerful.
And I loved that you said to me in our meetings about it, you know, what do you need, or what is it that you need so that you're going to be okay, and that you don't, you know, go under, or whatever the case may be. And the thing is that I could not have written this book if I had not arrived at the emotional fortitude and foundation to own it. That, you know, the fallout, the family fallout has been a lot, but it is my story, and I believe that I told the truth, and that I wrote it in a way that I feel proud of. But I love, Gab. I think about it a lot, especially in the last couple of weeks, for all sorts of various reasons, that you were like, what do you need? What are you going to need to make sure that you don't, like, lose your mind? Yeah.
Because it's a thing.
I can't wait to see it. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Greg.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca and Gabrielle, for doing this. It's been a great conversation. I want to remind viewers that they can purchase Surviving the White Gaze. It's available for sale with a signed nameplate at Skylight Books. Once again, thank you both for a great conversation, and thank everyone else for tuning in. Have a great evening.
No, thank you, guys.
Thank you.